doesn't look impressive. No gears, no steel limbs, no gunpowder, just a tall piece of wood and a string. And yet this weapon helped bring down the most powerful military class Europe had ever known. Armored knights, noble cavalry, the elite of medieval warfare. The English longbow didn't just kill men, it changed who could kill men. And in doing so, it quietly rewrote the balance of power on the battlefield. The story of the longbow doesn't begin in royal armories or great castles. It begins on the rugged frontier between England and Wales. In the 12th and 13th centuries, Welsh fighters were already using powerful bows for hunting and war. Long, heavy weapons capable of driving arrows with terrifying force. English kings encountered these bows the hard way during repeated campaigns in Wales. What they saw worked. These weren't ceremonial weapons. They were brutally practical, simple to maintain, fast to shoot, and devastating in skilled hands. Instead of discarding the idea, English commanders did something unusual. They adopted it. Welsh archers were brought into English armies, and over time, the weapon itself was transformed from a regional tool into a national system. By the late 1200s, under Edward I and his successors, the longbow was no longer just Welsh. It was becoming English doctrine. The real revolution wasn't the bow. It was the decision to build an entire society around using it. By the early 1300s, English kings understood a critical truth. A war bow was useless without a war archer, and war archers could not be trained quickly. So England did something radical. It legislated archery. Laws required able-bodied men to own bows. Practice was mandatory. Sundays and holidays were set aside for shooting. Other games were restricted, not because they were immoral, but because they were a distraction. From childhood, boys learned to draw heavier and heavier bows, shaping their bodies over years of repetition. England wasn't just training soldiers, it was cultivating a weaponized population. The longbow itself was deceptively elegant, usually around 6 feet tall, often as tall as the man who carried it. It was made from a single stave of yew. The bowyer exploited the tree's natural structure. Sapwood on the outside to resist tension, heartwood on the inside to endure compression. No moving parts, no mechanical advantage, just raw physics. True war bows often exceeded 100 pounds of draw weight, sometimes far more. Drawing one wasn't just difficult, it permanently altered the body. Arrows were massive by modern standards. Long, thick shafts tipped with specialized heads. Narrow bodkins for armor, broad heads for unarmored targets. Each arrow carried weight, momentum, and intent. And once loosed, there was no recall. What made the longbow terrifying wasn't a single shot, it was volume. A trained archer could fire 10 to 12 arrows per minute, not once, not briefly, but continuously. Compare that to a medieval crossbowman who might manage 2 or 3 shots in the same time. Multiply that difference by thousands of archers. The result was something medieval armies had never truly faced before, a sky full of death. Chroniclers struggled to describe it, arrows falling like snow, like rain, like a storm driven sideways by wind. This wasn't harassment fire, it was suppression. It broke formations, it panicked horses, it forced men to advance while being steadily dismantled. And for the first time in European warfare, heavily armored elites could be neutralized before they ever reached striking distance. The knight was supposed to be untouchable, steel plate, mail beneath, a war horse bred for impact. But the longbow exposed the limits of that protection. At realistic battle ranges, heavy war arrows could punch through mail and many forms of plate, especially where armor was thinner or poorly made. Even when plate held, horses did not. A dead or wounded horse turned a charging knight into an obstacle. A fallen knight became a problem for everyone behind him. And once formations collapsed into tangled masses, even the finest armor stopped mattering. The longbow didn't need to kill everyone, it only needed to stop them. All of this power came at a price. Years, decades, Skeletons recovered centuries later tell the story. Archers developed enlarged shoulder joints, twisted spines, reinforced arm bones, their bodies reshaped by repetition. Drawing a heavy war bow wasn't just strength, it was muscle memory, rhythm, endurance. These men weren't mercenaries who picked up a weapon when war came. They grew into it. England's kings understood this dependency, and they protected it. The longbowman wasn't noble, but he was valuable. And that would have consequences far beyond the battlefield. In 1346, those consequences became impossible to ignore. At Crécy, a smaller English-Welsh army faced a far larger French force filled with elite knights and professional crossbowmen. The English chose their ground carefully. They waited. When the Genoese crossbowmen advanced, they discovered a brutal truth. Their weapons were outranged and outpaced. English arrows fell in sheets. The crossbow line disintegrated. French knights charged anyway, riding through their own retreating infantry, straight into sustained longbow fire. Horses went down, men fell, momentum vanished. By the end of the day, the flower of French nobility lay dead or broken on the field. Crécy wasn't just a defeat, it was a humiliation. If Crécy shattered confidence, Poitiers broke the illusion completely. In 1356, Prince Edward of England, later called the Black Prince, found himself outnumbered deep in hostile territory. Retreat was risky. Standing and fighting was worse. So he did what English commanders now did best. He let the enemy come to him. French forces advanced through constricted ground, hedges, and natural choke points. Longbowmen were positioned to rake the attackers from multiple angles, while dismounted men-at-arms held firm. The pattern repeated. Arrow fire slowed the advance. Formations compressed. Momentum collapsed. By the end of the battle, the unthinkable had happened. The French king, John II, was captured alive on the field. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a political earthquake. A king taken prisoner by an army heavily reliant on common archers sent shockwaves through Europe. The longbow was no longer a tactical curiosity. It was a strategic weapon. Agincourt, the legend sealed in mud and blood. Nearly 60 years later, the longbow would earn its most enduring reputation. In 1415, Henry V's army was exhausted, sick, and badly outnumbered. Retreating towards safety, they were blocked by a far larger French force. Henry chose the battlefield carefully. A narrow strip of land, woods on both sides. Recently plowed soil turned to mud by rain. Thousands of longbowmen were planted behind sharpened stakes. The French advanced. Armor that should have protected them became a liability. Horses bogged down, men slipped, fell, and were crushed by those behind them. All the while, arrows kept coming. Not in single heroic shots, but relentlessly. When the French advance finally stalled into a suffocating mass of bodies and steel, the longbowmen did something unexpected. They dropped their bows. Armed with knives, swords, and mallets, they waded into the trapped nobles and finished the fight at close range. Agincourt wasn't just a victory, it was a transformation of myth into memory. The longbow became the symbol of English defiance, the weapon that broke the knight forever. What set the longbow apart wasn't raw power alone. It was integration. English commanders redesigned entire battle plans around archers. Men-at-arms dismounted to hold ground. Terrain was chosen to favor missile fire. Stakes and fieldworks protected bowmen from cavalry. This was combined arms warfare, centuries before the term existed. And crucially, it relied on people who were not nobles. Yeomen, townsmen, free men trained since childhood. The knight still mattered, but he was no longer the center of the battlefield universe. The longbow was not without rivals. Crossbows were easier to learn and could hit hard, but they were slow and mechanically complex. Early firearms promised greater penetration, But for much of the 14th and 15th centuries, they were unreliable and awkward. The longbow sat between worlds. It demanded immense human investment, but delivered unmatched volume of fire. It rewarded discipline, conditioning, and collective action. But that strength was also its weakness. You could not train longbowmen quickly, and the future was moving fast. The longbow quietly reshaped English society. Kings needed archers, and that meant protecting the people who could become them. Laws encouraged training. Property rights and wages for skilled archers improved. A vast supply network emerged to support war. Millions of arrows were produced. Yew was imported from across Europe. Bowyers, fletchers, and string makers became essential to national defense. This didn't create equality, but it cracked exclusivity. Military value was no longer confined to noble blood. Centuries later, the evidence remains. Skeletons recovered from graves and shipwrecks show the physical toll of archery. Reinforced arms, altered shoulders, asymmetrical bone growth. The Mary Rose, sunk in 1545, preserved dozens of longbows and thousands of arrows. These artifacts allowed modern researchers to measure draw weights, arrow mass, and construction techniques with precision. Recreated bows fired into replica armor confirm what chroniclers described. The longbow wasn't magic. It was physics, training, and numbers. By the 16th century, the balance shifted. Firearms became cheaper. Training times collapsed. States centralized power. You could arm and drill soldiers with guns in months, not decades. Archery laws became harder to enforce. Urbanization and changing labor patterns disrupted the old system. The longbow didn't vanish overnight, but its era was ending. What replaced it wasn't better craftsmanship. It was easier violence. The English longbow occupies a rare place in history. It was simple, but not easy. Primitive, but devastating. Democratic, but demanding. It marked the transition from elite, individual warfare to mass, organized killing. Between the knight and the musket. Between lineage and logistics. And for one extraordinary period, a piece of wood and a string allowed ordinary men to change the course of wars and humiliate the most powerful warriors on earth. Not by breaking the rules of warfare, but by mastering them better than anyone else.